I chose the commodity fetish as my topic. My initial idea was kind of to do reification, but I think the commodity fetish and that idea kind of tied together. So yeah, I wanted to start off with just a really awesome quote from Marx from Capital, Volume 1. It is absolutely clear that, by his activity, man changes the forms of the materials of nature in such a way to make them useful to him. The form of wood, for instance, is altered if a table is made out of it. Nevertheless, the table continues to be wood, an ordinary, sensuous thing. But as soon as it emerges as a commodity, it changes into a thing which transcends sensuousness. It not only stands with its feet on the ground, but in relation to all other commodities, it stands on its head and evolves out of its wooden brain grotesque ideas, far more wonderful than if it were to begin dancing of its own free will. So yeah, I love Marx. He's insane, and I love some of the stuff he writes. But I guess what is a commodity is the first question we want to ask when looking at this. It's an object produced through human labor that's bought or sold at market. And the commodity contains a lot of contradictions, the main contradiction being the contradiction between use value and exchange value. Use value is just the utility of any object. It's just how it's able to satisfy a human need. But exchange value is going to be is abstract. It's something kind of projected upon a commodity and measured by the socially necessary labor time required to create that commodity. So kind of another quote with Marx, I think Marx put it best. And I guess there's a lot of stuff has been written about this specific quote, but the commodity form and the value relation of the products of labor within which it appears have absolutely no connection with the physical nature of the commodity and the material relations arising out of this. It is nothing but the definite social relation between men themselves, which assumes here for them the fantastic form of a relation between things. He then kind of compares it to the misty realm of religion. They're the products of the human brain appear as autonomous figures endowed with a life of their own, which enter into relations both with each other and with the human race. So it is in the world of commodities with the products of men's hands. I call this the fetishism which attaches itself to the products of labor as soon as they are produced as commodities and is therefore inseparable from the production of commodities. So we have, with this fetishization that comes hand in hand with the generalization of commodity production and exchange in society. That becomes our main form of production and exchange. And when that happens, labor kind of is transformed into a homogeneous process. It becomes a commodity in and of itself. And for this to happen, there's some preconditions, and that's, it involves, a majority of the population being stripped of their access to the means of production. This majority, which is the proletariat, is forced to sell their labor to those who own the means of production for wages in order to procure their means of subsistence. And with these kind of unique relations and conditions that are necessary for this continued reproduction and expansion, we measure the value of all commodities purely by how much labor time was put into their production. And value in this case, it takes on a phantom objectivity, which is what Marx calls it. It's, value is now just this objective characteristic of a commodity, of commodities. I think that's important to distinguish between, commodity versus commodities. But you can't, but when we look at the actual commodities, we look at, I don't know, maybe like a cookie or something. We can see chocolate chips and flour and all this stuff, and we can taste these things. We can't taste value. We can't feel value. It's just this abstract thing that just exists. So now when we kind of look out into the world of commodities, we only see price tags and these relationships, which are exploitative relationships, are kind of obscured. We only focus on the value, and the value kind of dictates all these relationships. And therefore, ultimately, the social relations of production are no longer relations between people, but they're relations between things. Yeah, and then so another important thing that I like to think about with this is with the division of labor and commodity exchange. That's um, that and the kind of the form that I guess the generalization of commodity exchange under capitalism. There's no conscious agreement or coordination to how the aggregate labor in society is distributed or what is being produced. So it's kind of this blind production solely for exchange. And that's kind of what leads to a lot of overproduction, stagnation, and crisis, kind of those cycles that Marx predicted years and years ago. So that's, yeah, kind of what I've gathered from kind of the commodity fetish. And I wanted to do kind of talk about some stuff with reification. And I'm excited to kind of hear people clarify some stuff, because there's a few things that just it's really kind of abstract and hard to grasp sometimes, but I think really important. So with reification, it's kind of here's a good quote from Lukács. Just as the capitalist system continuously produces and reproduces itself economically on higher and higher levels, the structure of reification progressively sinks more deeply, more fatefully, and more definitively into the consciousness of man. So reification is kind of the perception of social relations as things. It's, these destructive and exploitative social relationships that are intrinsic to capitalism are kind of are looked at as just like natural modes of thought and interaction, I guess. And then another great quote from Lukács: the transformation of the commodity relation into a thing of ghostly objectivity cannot therefore content itself with the reduction of all objects for the gratification of human needs to commodities. It stamps its imprint upon the whole consciousness of man. His qualities and abilities are no longer an organic part of his personality, the things which he can own or dispose of, like the various objects of the external world. There is no natural form in which human relations can be cast, no way in which man can bring his physical and psychic qualities into play without their being subjected increasingly to this reifying process. So yeah, it's, with, in pre-capitalist societies, we had isolated examples of commodity exchange. And even those isolated occurrences, I think, did create problems. But when this becomes the general way that we produce, that are, like I said, the general mode of exchange and production, the capitalist mode of production, it has a completely different and kind of, different, its effects are like are of a completely different and pernicious nature. And so, yeah, reification and the commodity relation kind of penetrate and transform every sphere of human life. Everything, time included, is measured in quantifiable terms. And the unique qualities and essence of human interaction are kind of distorted and stunted. So, as a result, we see like mainstream economic theory is essentially bourgeois economic theory at this point. It's reduced to just repeated attempts at rationalizing all these kind of countless contradictions that exist within our current mode of production, our current economic system. Our entire juridical system kind of exists to uphold bourgeois values and laws. And we kind of exist, and even if we're unaware of these things, we kind of continue to affirm capital's grip on society. And kind of close, a lot of avenues to collective thought and collective progress. And it's this really frustrating kind of idea, because any interaction, we have to interact with this capitalist system to survive, and by interacting with it, we are helping it reproduce itself. So it's just a really, abstract, interesting thought. And the last thing I kind of wanted to say about that is these widespread effects of reification, they can be observed in like the development and interpretation of literature and excuse me, the development of like literature and artwork. We can see how the emergence of like different genres, narratives, motifs, character types, they they reflect the fragmentation of society that results from the total domination of capital. Frederick Jameson did a really cool quote that says, we see these divisions, this fragmentation, we start distinguishing between political and apolitical, social and private, and that those convenient working distinctions between cultural texts, they become a symptom and a reinforcement of the reification and privatization of contemporary life. Such a distinction reconfirms the structural, experiential, and conceptual gap between the public and the private, between the social and the psychological, or the political and the poetic, between history and society and the individual, which maims our existence as individual subjects and paralyzes our thinking about time and change just as surely as it alienates us from speech itself. So yeah, just there's so many reification. There's like a lot of like contemporary debates around it, and like there's a lot of reification, alienation, fetishism. They're all kind of like these crazy interconnected ideas around like which a lot of contemporary debates kind of revolve. And I really like looking into this, was just like, oh my God, there's so much shit on this. But I think they're super important ideas to kind of explore, to help us understand like the way that we think about society. A friend of mine called it like, these are kind of these inescapable problems of life under capital, and are, these, and we have to kind of look at those because it's just there's so many complex problems that we're facing right now. And I guess that's just another aspect that we should consider. I don't know. So yeah, I'm excited to hear everyone's thoughts and maybe some clarification on some of my ideas. And yeah, I guess that's all I got.